For generations, history seemed final, clean, convenient, almost too simple. The Maya appeared in the dense jungles of Central America, built pyramids that defied the sky, invented a calendar more accurate than any other in the ancient world, and then, for reasons that are still debated, their great cities fell silent. This was the story told in textbooks, the story repeated in museums, the story everyone considered almost complete. And then a fragment of evidence appeared, and the old explanatory model began to crack. It did not happen in a noisy press conference, not in a loud announcement. It happened quietly, in a laboratory where scientists examined sequences of ancient DNA extracted from bones buried for centuries under the moist soil of the Yucatan and the mountains of Guatemala. What they saw on the screens did not match the history they had been taught. It did not match anything they expected to see. And that is exactly where the slow unfolding of a much larger mystery begins. To understand the scale of what was found, one must first return to what we thought we knew. The standard version of Mayan history was told like this. Somewhere around 4,000 years ago, small communities began to settle in the lowlands of Central America. They grew corn. They built modest settlements. Gradually, over the centuries, these settlements grew. Monumental structures appeared, then cities, then kingdoms, then a civilization whose complexity still amazes archaeologists. It was a story of slow, local development, a people who emerged where they were found, a people whose roots, it was assumed, had been deeply embedded in the exact same land for millennia. And for a long time, this explanation worked, until it did not. Because there was always one detail that did not fit, one small problem that archaeologists pushed aside because it was inconvenient. The Maya do not look like their neighbors.
Their language is not like the languages of the peoples who lived around them. Their mathematics appeared out of nowhere, with a concept of zero that predated the Old World by centuries. Their astronomy was so precise that some of their calculations of Venus's movements differ from modern ones by only minutes per century. How could a culture of such complexity emerge in isolation? How could a people who, by assumption, never went beyond their jungles, create an intellectual system equal to anything in ancient Egypt, Babylon, or China? At first, it seemed like an exception, an anomaly, simply proof that human ingenuity can flourish anywhere. But then the evidence began to point in another direction. The first cracks did not appear in genetics. They appeared in linguistics. Some researchers studying the oldest forms of the Mayan language noticed strange structural features that had no connection to other languages of the Americas. Some sound patterns, some grammatical forms, seemed to have echoes in places much further away than one would expect. These were merely hints, whispers, not enough to rewrite history, but enough to trouble those who paid attention. Then archaeological anomalies began to appear. Stone carvings with facial features that did not match the characteristics of the region's indigenous population. Burial practices that echoed rituals on the other side of the planet. Architectural motifs that repeated in cultures separated by oceans and millennia. Each of these findings individually could be explained as a coincidence. The human brain, after all, is prone to finding patterns even where there are none. Each finding individually was interesting, but not decisive. But then came DNA, and DNA does not lie. In past decades, the technology of sequencing ancient genomes has taken a huge step forward. What was previously impossible became routine. Scientists were able to extract genetic material from bones that were over 2,000 years old, and read it with enough precision to see the lineages leading back through migrations that remained forgotten in oral history. When they applied these methods to the remains of the ancient Maya, the results were unexpected. The genomes did not show a single, clean, local origin. They showed a mixture, several layers, several migration waves that overlapped one another like geological layers in a rock. Some of these layers were expected.
a connection with other indigenous peoples of the Americas, a signal of ancient Siberian origin, common to most peoples of the New World. But there was also another layer, a layer that should not have been there. At first, researchers thought it was a mistake, a data processing artifact, sample contamination. They repeated the analysis, then they repeated it again. The signal remained, and the more samples they tested, the more distinct it became. In the genetic code of some ancient Maya, there was an ancient component that linked them to populations geographically separated by thousands of kilometers. Not a recent admixture, not the result of European contact. Something much older, something that reached deep into prehistoric times. And this is exactly where the story truly begins to break. The data did not simplify the past. It made it older. What emerged was not a straight line, but a web of migrations, contacts, and admixtures that stretched so deep into time that it questioned everything we thought we knew about how humans populated the Americas. The standard model told that humans came to the Americas across the Bering Land Bridge approximately 15 or 20,000 years ago. One main wave, perhaps two. Then these groups spread south, gradually differentiating into the indigenous peoples we know today. But the genetic signal in the ancient Maya hinted at something else. It hinted at an additional layer of ancestry that did not fit into this model. A layer that some researchers cautiously began to call a ghost signal. A signal from a population whose existence we did not even suspect. Who were these people? Where did they come from? How did they reach Central America? There is no answer yet. Only hypotheses. Only possibilities, each of which opens new questions. One hypothesis suggests that early migrations to the Americas were much more complex than assumed, that there were waves of arrival from different parts of the Old World at different times, along routes we have not yet mapped. Some of these waves could have come along the Pacific coast on boats, at times when it was believed that humans did not yet have sufficiently complex seafaring technologies. Another hypothesis suggests a stranger possibility, that the early populations of Siberia and East Asia were themselves more diverse than we thought, that they had components connecting them to even older populations that had long disappeared, and that these components entered the Americas along with the first migrants, but were preserved in some populations more than in others. A third hypothesis, the most controversial, suggests that the Americas could have been reached at different times from different directions, perhaps even through the southern hemisphere, perhaps through routes that are now hidden under the ocean due to the sea level rise at the end of the last ice age. Each of these explanations seemed partially convincing. Each seemed incomplete. And this makes the story deeper, not simpler. Because the ancient DNA of the Maya contained not only an unexpected layer of ancestry, it also contained traces of extraordinary genetic diversity, much greater than expected from a population that was assumed to be isolated. This diversity hinted at a long history of contacts, a long history of exchange, a long history of interconnections with other peoples about whom we have no written records. Perhaps the Mayan civilization did not emerge from isolation. Perhaps it emerged from convergence, from the intersection of different human streams that met in the dense jungles of Central America and gave birth to something new. This changes everything we thought about how civilizations emerge. Imagine for a moment the landscape of the Yucatan as it was 2,000 years ago. Giant limestone slabs rising from the forest, trails trodden through the green darkness, smoke from campfires rising to a sky untouched by any industrial light, stars so bright that astronomers on the roofs of temples could track the movements of planets with the naked eye with a precision that would put modern observatories to shame. In these temples, priests sang hymns in a language whose roots reached deeper than they themselves knew. They recorded words on tree bark and on stone stelae. They counted days in a system so perfect that it could mark any date in the history of the universe, They looked at the same stars their ancestors saw, and those seen by the ancestors of their ancestors, and somewhere in the memories passed down from generation to generation, perhaps, traces of the long journey that brought them to this place were still preserved. A journey that began far away, very far away. The ancient air smelled of damp leaves and smoke from burnt offerings. The stone walls of the pyramid in Tikal towered over the jungle canopy like artificial mountains. The sun was setting, coloring the stone in the shade of old blood. In this silence, amidst the cries of monkeys and the rustle of the evening wind, the descendants of people who arrived by several different routes at different times continued to live as if they had always been here. Perhaps they never knew the full story of their origin. Perhaps they passed down fragments in myths and legends that researchers would later call folklore, not realizing that these tales preserved real memories of events too old to be recorded in any other way. The Maya told of distant ancestors who came from across the sea. They told of wise teachers who brought the calendar and astronomy. They told of underground paths connecting worlds. For a long time, researchers dismissed these stories as mythology, as symbolic tales without a historical basis. But now some of these tales seem different, not as fictions, as memories. And this is exactly where the story becomes truly unsettling. Because if genetic data indicate that the ancestors of the Maya could have come by several different routes at different times, then the myths that were previously dismissed might have preserved the exact information we are now trying to recover from bones. How often do we dismiss what we do not understand because it does not fit into our models? Ancient DNA did not destroy the history of the Maya. It deepened it. It made it much older and much more complex than the old version allowed. It showed that what we call a people is never something simple. A people is layers, layers of migrations, layers of admixtures, layers of forgotten journeys that leave their traces in blood, in language, in bones, in the way people look at the stars. The Maya did not emerge from nothing. They emerged from intermingling. And this raises a question that scientists are only beginning to ask aloud. If the genetic history of the Maya is so complex, how complex is the history of other civilizations that we consider understood? How many peoples that we describe as local developments are actually the products of long, forgotten processes of migration and contacts? Perhaps the concept of a civilization emerging from a single land, from a single set of ancestors, in a single place, is a myth we created for our own convenience. Perhaps all civilizations are hybrids. Perhaps all identities are chimerical. This is not a new idea. Anthropologists have long assumed that human history is more fluid than national myths allow. But ancient DNA makes it concrete. It turns it from a philosophical position into an undeniable fact, written in molecules that survived the fall of empires. And yet, even with all this data, a large part of Mayan history remains uncertain. We do not know who these other ancient people were whose genetic signal appears in the bones. We do not know exactly when they arrived. We do not know how they traveled. We do not know what happened to them after their arrival. Did they merge completely with the local populations? Did they disappear? Do their descendants remain among us, unaware of their own genetic history? Every new study adds more questions than it provides answers. Every new finding complicates the picture. This is not a linear progress toward a complete understanding. It is a slow discovery of how vast the space is that we have not yet mapped. Some researchers believe that we are at the very beginning of a revolution in understanding the ancient history of the Americas. That what we call pre-Columbian civilizations is actually the tip of an iceberg that has lain beneath the surface of our knowledge for millennia. That there were far more cultures, far more migrations, far more connections than the standard model ever assumed. And the Maya, with their strange language, astonishing mathematics and strange genetic signature, may be the key to unraveling this much larger history. Not because they are the only ones, but because they have preserved traces of processes that have been erased elsewhere. Why do we so persistently crave simple origin stories? Why is it so hard to accept that the past is chaotic, layered, full of accidents and unfinished journeys? Perhaps because a simple story gives us a sense of belonging. It tells us who we are. It tells us where we are from. It gives us a stable foundation for building an identity. But the truth, as ancient DNA shows, is rarely simple. The truth is a web. The truth is layers. The truth is a combination of streams that intersected, diverged, and met again over tens of thousands of years. We are all descendants of migrations we do not remember, of peoples whose names are forgotten, of journeys whose roots are hidden under oceans and deserts. We are all products of processes that are much larger than ourselves. And when we look at the ancient Maya, at their pyramids, their calendars, their manuscripts written in symbols that have only recently begun to be deciphered, we are not looking at an alien people. We are looking at a mirror reflecting our own forgotten complexity. Somewhere in the depths of the genetic code of living people who today call themselves Maya, echo the reverberations of migrations that began long before the first hieroglyph was written. Journeys that crossed continents, encounters that gave birth to new cultures, losses that left behind only the faintest genetic traces. These people walk today along the same trails their ancestors walked. They speak a language that still preserves sounds so old that their origin is unknown even to linguists. They pass down traditions that remember things historians have forgotten. And when they look at the stars at night, perhaps they look at them with the same curiosity with which their distant ancestors looked at them when they first came to these lands, wherever they came from. In a sense, we are all still trying to solve the same riddle: who we are, where we came from, how we got here. Ancient DNA has given us new tools to ask these questions, but it has not given us definitive answers. It has only given us a new way to realize how vast this riddle truly is. What was revealed in the bones of the ancient Maya was not a simple refutation of the old history. It was an expansion, an invitation to think bigger, to see further, to view the past not as a finished book, but as a library in which most volumes are not yet catalogued, most pages are unread, and some books have not even been discovered. The research continues. Every year brings new samples, new sequences, new analyses. Every year adds another layer to a picture that becomes increasingly complex, not simpler. This is not disorienting. It is liberating. Because if the past is larger and more complex than we thought, then the present is the same, and the future too. We live on a thin layer of time that rests on a massive foundation of forgotten history. And from time to time, through an archaeological find, through genetic analysis, through the accidental decipherment of an ancient text, we get a glimpse of what lies beneath. The Maya were not what we thought, not because the old history was completely wrong, but because it was too small. They did not emerge from nothing in the jungles of Central America. They emerged from a long, complex, multi-layered history that is only just beginning to unfold before us. They were not an isolated people, but a crossroads. Not a local phenomenon, but the culmination of migrations, exchanges, and admixtures that spanned continents and millennia. Their pyramids stand in the jungles like questions to which we do not yet have full answers. Their calendars still count days that extend far beyond what any of us will see. Their languages still preserve sounds originating from places we have not yet identified. And in this silence, amidst stone and greenery, amidst the cries of birds and the rustle of wind in the leaves, history continues to unfold, not as a finished narrative, but as a living, constant unfolding of a mystery that, with every discovery, becomes not smaller, but larger.
Perhaps this is exactly where the true lesson of ancient DNA lies. Not in the specific answers it provides, but in the very act of forcing us to admit how little we know. How vast is that which we do not know? How complex and beautiful is the web of human history, in which we are all merely the newest threads. The Maya were not what we thought. They were something more, something older, something we are only just beginning to understand. And when the last shadow falls on the stones of Tikal, when the evening wind touches the treetops, when far in the darkness a monkey cries just as it cried thousands of years ago, we are left with the only honest conclusion that can be drawn from all this. The mystery was not solved. It was expanded. And perhaps that is exactly how it should be. Perhaps history was never meant to be finished. Perhaps it was meant to continue unfolding, layer by layer, discovery by discovery, until we finally understand that the path of understanding ourselves is not a journey to a destination. It is a journey that has no end. The Maya walk today on the land of their ancestors. They do not know the full story of their origin, and we do not know. And perhaps no one will ever fully know, but in the bones, in the genes, in the stones, in the languages, in the myths, all of this is still here, waiting, whispering, inviting us to keep listening. And this, perhaps, is the greatest gift of ancient DNA. Not the answers it provides, but the questions it opens. Questions we have not even learned to ask properly yet. Because in the end, the history of the Maya is not only their history, it is our history. The story of how humanity moved, intermingled, forgot, remembered, and forgot again over millennia, across continents, across oceans, in times we cannot fully comprehend. They were not what we thought, and we, perhaps, are also not what we think. And this, perhaps, is the most important truth of all. The mystery was not solved. It grew larger. And perhaps that is exactly why it remains so beautiful. There is a people that does not fit on the map. Not the geographical one, the historical one.